It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. All right, another day, another podcast. Welcome, everybody. Here, Lawrence and Chad Juttner joining us, and our special guest, Jared Johnson from the design team, to talk with us about design ops. Hello, Jared.
Hello. How's everybody doing today?
Awesome. All right, so design ops, design operations. Can you give us like an elevator speech, just an overview of what it is?
Design operations, or design ops for short, is the summation or the combination of the work that we're doing and how we're doing it as design resources or visual designers, design strategists, user researchers, kind of everywhere in between. So the way that we kind of standardize that work, the way that we as a team or a capability prioritize that work, and then the way that we're actually measuring, enabling, and even hiring for that work, whether that's in this case at a customer or even internally here at your organization. So that's design ops in a nutshell, is all of the things that make that process and those things up.
So it's kind of like DevOps, where you have a pipeline of things. Peter, you were going to say something?
Yeah, well, I was going to say it's kind of a, I don't want to say rebranding, but people have been doing this process for a long time, some at different stages and different levels, but it's nice to have tooling and other things brought together to kind of manage that, right?
Yeah, doing it with intention, whether that's intention is to headcount or skill set or processes. It's doing design is doing everything with intention inherently. So reflecting that back as to how you organize your team, the work of the work and how you do it. And then even, things like more tactically, especially as it leans more towards like the engineering and delivery side, as to how you leverage a design system and patterns and experiences and the way that you get the work done.
So if I'm a designer, how do I fit into the design ops pipeline?
Good question. Design ops and kind of the individual contributors that relate to it. It should and does vary by organizational adoption and understanding and maturity. And there's a lot of different kind of components that go into whether that requires a formalized role at your organization, or whether that's kind of a shared responsibility as to how the team manages and organizes and delivers work. But the idea is to, in individual contributors as an individual designer or UXer or researcher, you need to figure out where you fit in that puzzle. If it's a team of two, it's a fairly easy puzzle to put together, but it's when the organizations get larger that you need to be definitely more intentional as to if, how, when, where those teams, people, capabilities, processes kind of come together and are deployed.
So handing off between two people is pretty easy. You just high five and hand them the work, and you get about 30, 40 people, and it gets a little bit harder to do that high five around to all 30 people at the same time, and without having a football team or cheerleaders or something like that, right?
100%. And whether that's product management, as to like, these are the ways that we understand your team either does or could function and augment the need for whether that's kind of post-launch validation and the research and opportunities for that, or discovery work ahead of a body of work to help inform that and what that could, should, would look like. And then, the actual work of the work to build the thing in tandem with a tech team and product team, that the actual ways that you deliver and deploy those capabilities are going to look different and need to look different. It's going to get way more complicated, and you need to be way more intentional. The kind of the larger or the more headcounts that get involved in that conversation.
And just like DevOps, it's not just design people in design ops, right? It reaches out into the organizations more as they grow and everything, right?
Yeah, and again, in theory, it should. There's always the chance or the risk of doing things kind of in isolation or kind of in a vacuum. That's definitely an option. But arguably, the more kind of connected and integrated you are within those other teams and their priorities and their pipelines. I think there's even, conversations around design ops as it relates to kind of design or UX strategy. Being able to make sure that, if design's got a strategy as to how they interpret this product or feature or function to look and work and kind of be deployed. I'm sure there's folks within the product space that also have preconceived notions and assumptions as to where the train is headed. And even technologists and kind of actual engineering teams and individuals that, there's preconceived notions. And the more you can acknowledge that space and where you overlap and where you don't, and where capabilities and skill sets kind of complement each other. And again, having those conversations with intention for alignment is the beauty and potential function of what design ops can be, or the nuanced complexity and potential downfall that an organization can have if they're not having those conversations across disciplines.
Well, and being intentional and all of those kinds of great things, right? Like just to keep everybody on the same team and going forward all together. I know we talked yesterday a little bit about, shared components and libraries and things like that. Is that sort of the step one of design ops?
Yeah, or it's just one of the many pieces as to what it can be. So, if you kind of break it up into three kind of ideas or functions, it's the ways that you work together as a design team and design capability, how you get the work done. So whether that's like guiding principles or specific processes that this is a design system, this is how it supports and is integrated, and conversations happen consistently with the development teams at either a platform or an individual product level. And then the ability to measure the impact and ways that you're deploying your design capabilities within an organization. Definitely, design systems and the visual components and branding and ways that those kind of design principles show up in digital products needs to be very intentional, but it's one piece of the puzzle. And usually I kind of think of it as a triad, but there's definitely multiple layers to each of those components as well.
So is there, as part of a product approach or developing an application, is there a function of design ops as part of that project? Like, Chad, have you run into that with your projects?
I'm blessed with one of the best UX designers I think I've ever worked with in my life on my projects. And so, I honestly, I don't worry at all about UX design, UX processes, UX anything, because I am fortunate enough to work with literally the most talented designer that I think we have. Well, I don't know. I haven't worked with all our designers yet. I've only worked with
all one of them that you've worked with.
All one of them. Sample size is small, but the results are amazing.
Through my extensive research.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of a function of design ops is, having that kind of trust, having that process or person that really knows, what they're doing is dialed in so that you don't have to worry about it. Right.
I do know. So this is a blind spot for me, right? I'm learning as I'm listening. But I do know, our UX designer, there is a repository of a repository of components that we can pull from, right?
So a shared repository for the whole org.
There you go. Yeah. So when we're talking about the design ops ideas, I'm super curious to hear about the tool set that supports a lot of this, Jared. And I know, Figma's massive and almost ubiquitous, I think, in your world. But what other tools are you guys using to help support some of the principles of the design ops process?
Yeah, so I think the reason why, and having a active and ongoing relationship and understanding with that individual UX contributor, I think it's the understanding that person has with how, where, and when to stay connected to the greater organizational kind of priorities and the direction that the ship's moving in, and then the individual lane and way that those tactics at a larger scale or conceptually are implemented specifically within an individual product or service or platform. So what makes a great UX designer or individual contributor is the ability to kind of acknowledge the operational direction and vision and be able to see that and understand that, and then internalize it and deploy it within an individual product team. And a design system is usually the way that those visual kind of patterns and representations that usually reflect that kind of code base that's actually in various levels of fidelity as well across the organization, that they're able to deploy that kind of consistency of brand and styling and digital products in kind of alignment, and hopefully there's a operational component that happens that's able to distribute, hey, these updates are going to be happening, or this is how it's going to impact your work, as well as like, oh, you need assistance, or like the team or product team that you're working on actually needs 1, 2, 3 people, or a different skill set or capability that maybe isn't currently there, that we can either augment or build or skill or upskill individuals to be able to meet the needs of that individual product team. But again, kind of in orchestration with the greater alignment of the design vision and the design operational standards that company has.
I'm so glad we're recording this because I'd never remember all of that. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Are you reading
Pause, rewind.
Yeah.
Not at all.
He's just reading a paragraph. No, just kidding.
So
It's really long.
your skill set that like when you go in, you have to be like a strategist. You have to understand design. You have to be able to speak to leadership and communicate that and know all the parts of the pipeline. It seems like a lot of stuff to stay on top of.
Yeah, and it's a matter of kind of finding alignment and mutual understanding as to what are the expectations. So a lot of times consultants step in and they're just trying to figure out like, what's the lay of the land? Who are the people and processes and things that this organization defines as either a source of truth or the guardrails they need to operate in. I do the same thing from like, who are all the designers or other designer, in Kyle's case, that it's just me and him working on an engagement, that like, okay, now we know like this is the scale that we should operate in as far as communication styles and check-ins and standards that we either need to establish or adhere to, and work with everything from, those product management folks to the individual product teams as to like, okay, this is the landscape that we need to operate in. This is the need that you have, at least felt need that you understand. And this is kind of how we're going to move forward. And sometimes that's as an individual contributor, and maybe 10% as like a design leader and organizer and orchestrator at that engagement. Or maybe it's they purely need a better understanding of their maturity and landscape, and they need to standardize some of those processes because they have a growing capability internally. And that leads into kind of the maturity understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like development, where that you go into, some organizations and they're not doing full automated deployments and other technical things like that. They're winging it. They're following a procedure. Maybe they have a checklist or something like that. But it's not as robust as, some of the things that have been added in the last, I don't know how many years, but, the tooling that makes deployments and things like that more rigorous and allows you to do those kinds of things without error, repeatability and things like that, so things don't get lost.
Yeah, and the value that like not every organization needs to go 0 to 100. Like maybe they're fine operating at 30%. Again, that's an abstract kind of concept, but they don't need 10 people within design management and individual directors and heads of individual functions. Like maybe at X organization, like this is how they need to organize or should organize for today. And maybe just an aligned understanding and vision as to what things could look like. But this is what good enough looks like for now. And this is what aspirationally we could do to better deploy and partner and align with our product teams and our tech teams.
Yeah. So, I got a question for you, Jared. What does design ops implemented poorly look like to you? Like, how do you screw this up?
Sure. I mean, a lot of times it's from on high. It's a prescribed thing that this is the only way to do things, and this is empirically the best thing that works at every organization. So this is what we need to do and how we need to do it. I don't know if anyone here has ever been a part of a team that's operated that way. But if just like building an individual product or service with user input and feedback and perspective captured in conjunction with business priorities and technical feasibility, it's very important to work with an either existing like UX practitioners or design practitioners at your organization, or researchers in case of like a UX repository of feedback specific to a product or service. Like you need to build this thing together, and whether that's for an organization or for an individual product team, the more kind of collaboration you can do, the better. Or like worst case scenario, I've seen just standards that are documented and established and set, just like UX personas are sometimes done. And they're in that one folder that we never look at ever again. And we don't actually use them, or it doesn't add value. It's just a really fun exercise. It's not going to add value. So as long as you're doing it with intention, you're acknowledging the space that you're building or maturing that capability in, I think you're probably doing it right.
Nice.
Yeah, I've run into that where, it was SharePoint, Chad. You have like, we're going to move all our documents, our content, we're going to move it over, and we're going to now use properties instead of folders. We're going to like all these ideas, and we're going to put all that in there, but people still have access to the file shares and like you didn't burn the ships when you got to the new world. So people can still, use it and circumvent all the processes you put in place, because it's change. Moving to a thing like this can be a large change. It sounds like something though that's really scalable. Like you can go in and say, okay, let's do a consistent, repository of components so that we can stay on brand. I used a design term.
That was good. That was well done. That was nice.
So like start there. We're going to okay, this is something that's going to save us a lot of time and headache and keep us aligned with the organizational goals. This one thing we can do. And then we can kind of build out from there. Having an early success, I think, is really important for any of these types of projects, whether it's design or SharePoint.
Is scale one of the driving factors to starting a design ops practice?
Yeah, I was going to say, and whether that's a formal role at an organization or whether that's a shared responsibility, just an, again, intentional discussion or alignment as to if it's the two of us, like we're going to share the responsibility of making updates to that design system, pinging each other as to when we do it, and making sure that dev's included as to it's deployable and scalable in the ways that they need it to be. So as long as there's, again, intention at the scale that you're maturing or building that capability, and it fits and aligns with management's, backing.
I'm right now working on some design ops, like a reusable email signature that's got some branding components in it that everybody can, follow some simple instructions for adding it. Oh my gosh. I don't want to go into it, but it's challenging.
Sure.
But once it's done, like it saves time across, like you put it in there and we're good. Everybody's good for now. And, it just works. So you don't have like weird, Times New Roman, Comic Sans, whatever signatures.
And yeah, I think as it relates to like that maturity conversation that, again, we can go way deeper on. As it relates to what makes sense for an organization or what makes sense for an initiative or email implementation. The aligning as to like what's the definition of success. If we wanted to measure this on the other side, like what does it look like if to now everyone on mobile and desktop relative to sending out email messages that an individual named at a later date could be identified as like that person doesn't receive any email messages with varying signature styles.
Nice.
Maybe that's the definition of success around that, or maybe it's something else completely, or formatting or styling is measured in a different way. It's that mutual understanding, again, whether that's project and product delivery to traditional engineering or data structure. Like it's a matter of what's your definition of success as it relates to this body of work, and mutual understanding with stakeholders on that.
And are there any, like you talked about measurement, are there any like hard and fast metrics that kind of like, here's the top 5 metrics that you should be considering? Or is it every organization is different? And just because email signatures are really important to Kyle doesn't mean that Chad cares about them. And so they might measure those things differently if those guys were 2 different organizations, which, some days it feels like it, some days not.
Yeah, there's very tactical ways to be able to measure success. A way that we've done it a lot with tools like Figma, and I think Sketch has a similar solution with libraries and patterns. That you can actually see what's the total number of components or variations of components that you have within a design system, and how many of those are implemented. How many of those are in product files, and then therefore how many of those product files have come to fruition as new feature sets or services or functionality. You can actually quantify that as to there's 450 components that are used. So
Nice.
Now when we say we need to actually work with development and update styling because Marcom came back to us and we changed our blue, crazy idea, philosophical potential idea.
Nobody ever changes
but
blue.
If that would happen, that could potentially get complicated if you have individual isolated components. So the process that Design Ops is implemented to say this is consistently all of our variations of this individual component or value or design token, updating that actually is a fraction of the time. So you can quantify that as well, like any updates or maintenance ability to do that going forward, and multiply that by how many components are out there and how many instances are actually used, or even how many times it's called detached in Figma, but how many times they're kind of isolated and then changed into something different, and how many times those are deployed. So you can say actually opportunity cost, this is how many things we haven't touched or changed or added. Is that okay? Do we want to do that with intention? And saying this is the scope and time and cost associated with doing this thing. And it's way easier with this process implemented.
Right.
This is actually way more expensive to do it over here if we don't do it that way.
Do things 100 times or do things 100 times, 100 things once, right?
Yeah, but if you have a decision to make, is it worth it? It's well, we're going to spend 40 hours implementing this thing that saves us 1 hour a year. Is that is it worth it? But those reusable components, the ability to change something in one place and have it across all your whatever your application or intranet or whatever, those things are a huge time savings when it comes to implementing it. If you've ever changed the title of a department, that is
and had that title propagate many, many, many places, right?
Yeah. So it sounds like you implement this and you have to convince the team you're working with to go through that period where it's going to get worse before it gets better. We're going to have to do these things. We're going to have to change the way you're working. And you might have an additional responsibility as part of this, and you have to learn how to do that. But it's worth it. It's definitely worth it.
Defining worth it within that organization for DevOps practices doing pull requests or doing change management things or having gatekeepers of certain parts of the code base or release timelines. You don't have to do it. Arguably, things might be more stable.
Right. Everybody could just check in all the code they want, right? And it always works perfectly, and nobody has any problems with code getting out of hand or variable names becoming the letter Q for whatever reason, and 40 arrays, of miscellaneous things, a nice object called Q. That never happens. Nobody ever does that.
Umpteen hands in the same kitchen or cookie jar.
Right.
Trying to change things at the same time perpetually, it's going to potentially slow things down or make things inconsistent. So to be able to measure, quantify the impacts of implementing those processes, whether that's for performance sake of a product or service or an application, whether that's measuring consistencies or cost savings or avoidance or risk management with if things break or they're not stable or things like that. Just like in kind of the more traditional engineering or development shops, it's the same basic premise. You need to justify the work that you're doing, or it's
right.
not valuable. We're not doing work just for the sake of doing work. There is a a cost and a risk and a value associated with those things, and having a conversation around that and quantifying those as much for the business. Because it's potentially an investment, or it's a new process or way of working. Change is hard. I don't know if anybody's ever experienced it before. It's not always super fun. But to be able to, again, do it with knowing what the value is going to be, knowing if I work out X number of days, these number of pounds are going to be shed, or maybe it's your level of fitness increased by X. Being able to quantify that matters.
Yeah, very true. And that's where design ops comes in, right? Is being able to measure things and quantify it and get the team together and agree to things, right?
100%. Yeah. And that's, again, not just your fellow designers and they need to go do that over there. But having and kind of stakeholders or representation from traditional product management, tech teams and feasibility, and then also the designers and the practitioners of the craft. It matters. It matters having those voices all speak into what that end solution is going to look like.
I had read a little bit about this topic, and all I remember is the term feedback loop. That's not true. I remember other things, but the net, having that as part of your pipeline, where you've got a feedback loop back to leadership and a feedback loop back to the team. It's like that communication as part of that it sounds like it's integral.
Integral.
Depends on if you're European.
Oh yeah. I forget about Europe. So what does that look like? What is it? Have you put that in place in any of your projects, Jared? Like those types of things?
Yeah, whether that's larger scale, like, if we make these updates to a design system or a process, or we hire this capability internally or externally, this is going to be the upside. This is going to be the value add that's going to create. Quantifying that, aligning on that, having mutual understanding on that is great at the start of that first loop. If you never talk again and you don't care at all about budgets, and you don't care at all about if and how that impacts the rest of the business, then Godspeed, enjoy your tea. But I think it's probably more worth it to check in as to hey, we had initial understandings that this was going to reap a cost savings or avoidance or value with user adoption or retention or things like that in this way. Did it?
Right.
Was that valuable? Should we grow or scale or change things? I don't know about all of you, but I enjoy growing and learning as a person. So I think there's ways to improve it, or maybe shut it down or change or grow things, and whatever that looks like. Again, Nielsen Norman Group has kind of a face in the design world, everything from design ops practices and management to individual practitioners and research. And they always kind of have a catchphrase that it depends. It depends for your organization. It depends with your team and your makeup and your skill set and your people and your partners and your organization. So
right. Yeah.
That phrase to me, it always kind of sounds a little bit like a cop out.
Yeah.
But what else are you going to say? Because it does depend. It's like, this is not we're not going to bring in this thing and just put it in place. It's not a black box.
Right.
And every organization is different or operates differently. Yeah. So your job is to go in and get rid of it depends and replace it with the answer.
Yeah. That for this organization, for this team, for these products and service suites, and whether that's me sitting in a chair as an individual practitioner and just sharing this concept in a lower maturity organization, or that's supporting and augmenting their existing teams with ways to do it differently, or a different perspective, or a way to be able to quantify and measure the success of it. Or even if how it impacts potentially hiring practices, or maybe capabilities that either they have internally or they have within different people or business units. It's a conversation worth having for sure.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Kyle.
Go ahead. Oh, maturity comes up in these conversations, and it kind of has a negative connotation to it, but it's really not like a dirty word in this context.
Shouldn't be.
It's just a fact of where we're at in this process. How old we are. So you mentioned, I think we talked about this a little bit. You mentioned you're not upset with your kids because they're kids and they're acting like kids.
Yeah, that's crazy. Why would they do that? They're horrible people. Like, no, that's where they're at in their current state. That's their sense of normal is and their understanding and competency. It's not wrong. It's where they're at.
Right.
I can either choose to meet them where they're at, or I can, choose to kind of help them learn and grow and understand that there might be other options to their choices.
Maybe the chalkboard is better to draw on rather than the wall.
Choose your own adventure.
So design strategy, does that fit into this as well? Is that sort of tightly coupled?
Yeah, I think it definitely kind of complements it. The ways that you actually like deploy and work, the direction that the team thinks it's all heading in. I think, everything from like finance or financial strategies to individual product strategies, design strategy is also a concept that's probably worth entertaining too. If you want a mutually understood way of looking at kind of future state and desired state as to where you want things to go, whether that's quantifying or qualifying measurements around what design is and should be within your organization or product team, or just establishing goals as to like, these are probably the checkpoints that it takes to get to this level of aspirational maturity that we're hoping to with a product or service or app. And then like, what's the actual like tactical way to get there? What's our plan to make incremental success and change and steps towards adopting those practices or processes or measurement tactics?
Do you ever have organizations kind of come in dreaming about the end state, but not recognizing that they're just at the starting line?
No, never. Yeah. I mean, wow, Lamborghinis look nice. Like, I want to get a Lamborghini. Well, owning a Lamborghini requires some things.
There's no maintenance on a Lamborghini. That's the nice thing
really
about them.
handy. That's a handy feature of sports cars and luxury cars, is you don't have to take care of them at all. So
It's a one-time cost.
yeah. So there's conversations like that that's like, oh yeah, I mean, by all means, you can be here and you can either invest a whole lot of time, or you can completely prescribe this, or like change your entire team makeup and fire everybody and rebuild it the way you want. Or again,
here's a different map that lets you.
There's a different way to do it,
Right.
and there's options. You have ways of, again, finding incremental ways to pivot or change or adopt incremental practices to improve kind of the end goal. And that's where UX strategy and kind of design operations, there's definitely kind of a marriage and partnership there as to aspirationally where you want to go, what are the ways to be able to figure out that you want to actually have goals to be able to meet that thing, and then what are the tactical ways to start implementing that.
So
is there a size? So like we were talking last week about diminishing returns, right? There are a variety of sizes, but is there an organizational size where like maybe they're too small for a proper design ops practice, right? Like we started out by talking about 2 people. Even just 2 designers could probably still use some sort of design ops workflow to help them. I'm just trying to imagine like massive organizations, right? Like this seems like perfect for an organization, 300 to 500 people. I'm just throwing out numbers, right? Where like, hey, I've got a group of designers, I've got a consistent design strategy, I've got a, whatever, and we've got a design up practice now that's constantly being utilized and perfect,
Yay.
Yeah, exactly.
Great, yeah.
And then it seems like little tiny boutique shops could, this might be maybe overkill, maybe not. And then there's these massive things that, holy crap, I don't know how you almost have to silo your design ops, I would imagine, right? But is there is there a sweet spot for some of this?
Yeah, and I mean, it's probably relative to the size of the headcount of the organization. So I think if we start from like individual practitioner, there's studies that have been done that it's like between 5 to 8, 5 to 10 UX designers relative to engineers. So one individual practitioner as a designer, hyper specific and specialized in UX, that there might be a 1 to 5 ratio. Well, if your organization is 50 people, the total number of engineers and stakeholders within product management or project management, you'll have to kind of organize and facilitate standards and processes and ways to measure things. That's a way easier conversation to have. A lot more people, a lot more complexity, not always reflective of a lot more maturity, because you might still think that scalable solution will work at an organization that size. And I think it's probably relative to the headcount that, well, okay, you have a bunch of individual product teams or individual contributors working on different products and services within different business units. There's all different needs. There's tablets, there's desktops, there's potential colors that only that one innovation capability is earmarked or able to access or use or leverage. Or we actually want to intentionally have different teams working on a different brand or concept or representation of our digital products and solutions. Or the ways that it's going to show up to this market segment is going to be different for an organization. There's different ways that also you want to measure success relative to different teams and parts of the organization. So just as that conversation gets more complex and potentially more nuanced, your design ops team, from headcount to practice to ability to measure and focus and dedicate time and effort and energy and resource to those things, probably should follow relative suit. That you have a couple hundred or thousand designers or UX practitioners and people within your organization doing design. You probably need a larger scale of people organizing and orchestrating that practice with intention at a larger scale.
Heard a lot of things in the last 40 minutes we could drill down in and spend another hour talking about.
Just like Ogres, it's got layers to it. Yeah.
Yeah, like the organizational maturity topic, I think.
Yeah.
The process, the scalability, all of that, it sounds like, it's something that needs to be considered no matter how big your organization is.
Yeah, it should be. Doesn't have to be. Just like I think I likened it to product or engineering, like doesn't have to be. It can be a little bit more of the Wild West. And kind of everyone makes their own rules and there isn't mutually understood alignment or understanding and process and measurement and actually deploying and organizing those tactics. But yeah, arguably it probably should be done with intention, as with everything in design. So,
well, we got a couple minutes left. Any parting thoughts before we shut her down, gentlemen?
I think it's amazing. I really have come to an understanding that it's more on par with DevOps than it sounds, right? When you think about design, you're like, oh, that's those other folks doing cool things with, I don't know, the color blue, like we said, right? And it's just nice to see that it's maturing and coming into an organization and can really get some design ops around things.
Yeah, again,
to mesh right in there.
Those with intention and figuring out ways that you either want to measure the work to be done, organize and standardize the ways to do it and processes, or hire and grow your internal capabilities. Like however you want to do that at your organization, it depends. But it's up to our customers and clients and each organization to figure out what makes sense for them. So
maybe starting with something like an assessment.
Yeah, figure out what matters, what ways you can make specific budget, either cuts or improvements or partnerships within your organization to say, like, we can quantify this or qualify this and say that if we do this work, this is what we can do. And whether that's experienced professionals who do design ops or kind of senior level experienced designers to kind of help kind of figure out what that story is and ways that they can either standardize those processes or work with tech teams and things. Yeah, you can go grassroots or you can look externally to kind of build that maturity and understanding.
Awesome. I think with that, that's a perfect way to end it, gentlemen. The last 40 minutes. Thanks everybody for joining us, Jared. I think we'll shut her down and say goodbye, everybody.
See you guys.
Goodbye. Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.